All right, in this one, I'm going to be showing you how to build out a simple full stack app where we leverage OpenAI's Whisper API and Stripe for incorporating payments. So the way that this works is we're going to be able to drag an audio file into our interface here. And then from there, we have a dynamic price that we have generated and set. And then from there, we can input credit card information. So this is just Stripe's test credit card. And we can just put in, like we have here, we can click pay and transcribe. And then from there, we'll get this loader that pops up showing that the payment's been successful. And now it's actually transcribing the audio from the endpoint. So you see it's pretty quick. This is the size of about a 2-minute video that I had that we have transcribed. We'll also set it up so it downloads a TXT file that you can reference as well. So we're going to be building it in Node.js, and on the front end, we're going to be using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're going to be referencing some libraries both on the back end and on the front end. And without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm just going to hop over to another Chrome window that I have here. So it goes without saying you're going to need Node.js installed for this. So likely if you're seeing this video, you already have it installed, but just to cover our bases in case there's some people that don't have it yet. So once you have that, we're going to have to head over to the platform.openai.com website and just head over to the API keys tab here. So once you're there, it's pretty simple to generate a key. As you see, just click create new secret key. You can name the key and then you'll copy that key. So you can just leave that tab open. I'll show you where we're actually going to be putting that API key in a second. And once we have all that ready, we're going to hop over to Stripe. And what we're going to do in Stripe is we're going to head over, set up an account. I'm not going to go through setting up all the steps. It's pretty intuitive. Just go register as if you're a new business, go through all the steps. And then ultimately, once you're all set up and in the dashboard, just click the developers button at the top here. So we're going to have two keys that we're going to use for Stripe. So we're going to have our publishable key and our secret key. So just to quickly touch on these so they don't get confused. So our publishable key is what we're going to have in the front end of our application. So this is the part that doesn't need to be secure somewhere. It's how the front end is going to interact with the back end. And then it goes without saying our secret key. So this is going to be what we reference in the back end. And this is our private key. So don't share that or put that on GitHub or what have you. So once we have these two tabs open, I'm just going to hop over to VS Code. So in our VS Code, if we before we open up, I should say, we're going to set up a simple couple directories as well as some files. So if you go ahead and, so the first thing that you can run in your terminal is if you just go npm init-y, that will allow us to initialize the project. Then from there, we can touch or just create in VS Code, create a new file for server. Then we're going to create another folder. So you can make dir or create a folder for uploads. And then we're going to have our public folder here. So once we have our public folder, you're going to make these three files. So app.js, index.html, and style.css. So once we have all that set up, we're going to go into our .env. So within our .env, you should still have your Chrome tabs open here. And you'll be able to copy over your key from OpenAI and then just make sure that you have it within here as it's shown. So you're not going to put the API key in a string or anything. You're just going to paste it after the equal sign for all these values. So We'll grab that from OpenAI. We'll head over to Stripe, get our secret key. So we'll reveal our secret key, put it here, and then our session secret. So you can generate this. This is going to be what we use to use our file paths within Express. So you can just put some random characters or generate it. There's a handful of ways that you can do this, but this you can make a unique value for yourself here. So just create a unique value and add it in there. So once you have those, go ahead and save your .env. And so after we have our directory all set up, I'm just going to quickly show you our package.json. So within our package.json, we have a handful of dependencies here. So we have Axios, body parser, etc. So what you'll need to do is you'll need to go ahead and npm install or npm I all of these things as you see. So you can do that all within one line in the terminal. So you can just npm I Axios space body dash parser, etc. and so on. So just make sure these are all installed. If you have a typo or forget one, it's the terminal should be pretty clear in the error if it comes up later on. But hopefully that's not the case. So from there, I'm going to hop over to our server and we're going to start building this out. So I'll just make this full screen for now, and I'll make it a bit bigger. And I'll also close out our terminal there. And then just so we have this all on the screen. So as you see here, it looks like a lot of steps that we're going to be doing, but we're going to go through all this pretty quickly. And also I didn't mention off the top, but if you do want to have the files for this and just take this, fork this, do whatever you want with it, I do have a GitHub repository with this. You'll see it's a pretty crude example of how you can incorporate an application like this. There's lots of things on the margin that can be improved. So you can take this and use this as sort of a starting point for integrating this into a service you have or an idea you might have. So feel free to use it however you want, and hopefully you find this useful. So without further ado, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to require Express. So Express, if you haven't used it already, so it's our web app framework. So we're going to be using this to set up our endpoints. We're also going to be using this to serve our static files for the front end. So that index HTML, the style CSS, and the app.js, that's going to all be served through Express here. Then body parser. So body parser is used for parsing incoming post requests. So this is just so we'll be able to actually read that on the back end without any complications. It's often something that you set up and you don't realize until you actually make a post request and you realize, oh shoot, I need body parser as well. So Multer is what we're going to be using for handling our file uploads. So because the user is dragging into our interface, we're going to also upload that MP3 or said audio file to the server. So we're going to be using Multer to accomplish that. Then we're going to be using Express Session. So we're going to be using Express Session for the file paths. So as you might imagine, say if there's multiple people using your application, you'll want different sessions so that different files aren't being referenced for different tasks. And there's a handful of other reasons, but we're going to be using Express Session rather for handling the sessions. Then we're going to be using .env and we're just going to initialize it with .config. So this will allow us to reach into our private keys and our environment variables simply by initializing and requiring this library here. So from there, we're going to start setting up Stripe. So this is where we reference the Stripe private key. So if you still have it open, keep your Stripe tab open in a Chrome tab, because we're also going to circle back and grab our public key once we get to the front end of the application. So then we're going to require path. So path is what we're going to use to work with our local file path. It will just make things a lot easier for us. And then if you haven't used Express before, so the way that we create an Express instance is, this is sort of standard convention, is we'll have our app variable, and then we'll have that equal Express. And then we're going to be using Axios. So you don't have to use Axios in this. I've just, over the years, gotten familiar and comfortable with using Axios, and I quite like it as a library. So this is what we're going to be using for API requests. Then form data, we're going to be using form data to actually send the MP3 or audio file to the OpenAI Whisper API. So there is a certain way that the OpenAI API handles files, and this is what I found most useful or easiest to use for sending the audio files to the Whisper endpoint. So once we have that, we're going to finally require FS to read and write files from our system. So the first thing that we're going to do once we have everything required is we're going to go ahead and set up Multer. So we're just going to set it up and reference the uploads path for where we're going to actually store our audio files. Then from there, we're going to set up the file names, and we're going to set it up in this instance with unique timestamps and the original names. So just so that it has a likely unique name that we'll be able to reference. Then from there, we're going to initialize Multer. And then we're just going to go through and do some sort of housekeeping necessary tasks just to set up Express and set up body parser and whatnot. So this is going to be referencing our public front end of the application. So we'll just be able to serve it up right to our local host. Then we're going to use these to parse our post requests, like I mentioned. Then once we have that set up, we're just going to set up the Express session middleware. So we can do that just like you see here, and this is where we're going to be referencing that session secret that we had set up in our .env. So once we have that set up, I'll just scroll down here. We're going to create a transcribe audio function. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a variable for our OpenAI API key. We're going to reference which model of Whisper that we're going to use in this example. So in this one, we're going to be using Whisper-1. And we're going to, from there, create a form data object and append it to the required data. So this is where we're actually going to be leveraging that library that we required above, and we're going to start building out that request that we're going to ultimately send to the OpenAI API. And then this, it's a bit longer here, but I'll just run through it quickly. So this is the actual endpoint for Whisper. This is where we'll effectively append our options or our config. So we'll be sending our file, we'll be sending the model, and then from there, we're going to just set up some of the headers that we need to set up for the API. And then just standard, we're going to wait for the data to come back. We're going to throw a catch if there's any error. And then we're just going to resolve or reject the promise from there. So the function will return a promise. So we'll just wait and hope that it is successful once the audio file is actually sent. So from there, we're going to set up our upload endpoint. So in this, we're going to specify that it's just going to be a single file that we're going to upload. It'd be interesting if someone wanted to try and build out this application where it could accommodate a handful of files and return it in, maybe break out that DOM area into multiple sections, or create some buttons or an interface to download various files. But I digress a little bit. So here, this is where we're going to actually be starting to reference our session. So here we're going to be referencing the file path within our session. And then from there, we're just going to send back a response to the front end, whether that file was successfully uploaded or not. And then if it wasn't uploaded, we're just going to send back a message saying that there was an error in uploading the file. So from there, we're going to set up our charge endpoint. So this is going to be when that user clicks that pay and transcribe button on the front end. It's going to call our charge endpoint, and we're going to destructure a few things that we're ultimately going to be sending to the Stripe API here. We're going to, you'll see this as a theme as I go out, try and continue with best practices and handling our errors in case anything comes up as we go through this. So just set up a simple try catch. And we're going to charge the Stripe API with the amount, currency, and source. From there, we're going to send whether the payment was successful or not. So Stripe is super quick with a response, whether that credit card is accepted or rejected with the payment. And then similarly, if it's rejected, we'll just send back that the payment has been rejected or failed. So from there, we're going to set up our transcription or transcribe endpoint. So this is where we're going to actually be transcribing the audio file. So sort of once the payment's successful, go ahead and transcribe it. It's sort of the logic that we're going to have implemented. So again, set up our try catch. We'll say, okay, if there's a file path in the session, continue on. Otherwise, send back a message that there isn't a file path. Hopefully that we never actually get this error though. So from there, we're going to await our transcription of the audio. And we're going to send a success message back with the actual transcription. So this transcription key and value is what we appended to the DOM, and then also the value that we had created in the text file. And then finally from there, we're just going to send back an error if there's a transcription. That way we can see what's going on from the front end if any errors come up. And then from there, I'm going to set it up on port 3000. If you have something running on port 3000, I know it's a popular port, just feel free to change this as you see fit, but I'll just leave it for now. And then from there, we're just going to actually set up and start our server. So this is sort of a convention for starting an Express server. You'll just say, okay, server's running at this port. The nice thing is once you actually start this, in your terminal, you'll be able just to click this in your terminal, similar in you see VS Code here, you'll just command click, and then you can open that port. And then that does it for our server. So once we have our server done, I'm going to just quickly, before I go into the index.html or app.js, hop into the style CSS. So I have some styles here, but I'm going to make the assumption that the vast majority of people watching this aren't here for the styling. So I'm not going to go through the styling here, but if you want it and use this as a boilerplate for whatever you're doing, just reach for the GitHub repository. Feel free to use this whole repository as a starting point, or just reach for the styles if you're following along with building out the code. So from there, I'm going to hop over to our index.html. So the HTML is going to be pretty straightforward, and it's going to be broken up in a handful of sections. So like you see here, we have it really just broken out into different steps. So there's going to be a little bit more to it than these 3 steps, but largely this is where most of the logic is going to lie in step 1, 2, and 3. So within our HTML, just go ahead and create a basic HTML structure. You can do that in VS Code by hitting Shift, exclamation mark, and tab with Emmet, and it will just give you the basic HTML head, body tag, and a couple other things here. And then from there, I'm just going to start including a few of the libraries that we're going to be using. So I'm just going to be using Tailwind for this. I'm just going to reference this CDN. Like I mentioned, it's not really a tutorial on styles, so feel free to use just vanilla CSS or any other library or the CSS that you use typically to implement this. But in this case, I'll just use Tailwind to keep it simple. So from there, we're going to require the front end CDN for Stripe. In this case, I'm going to be using their V3 version of the CDN. And then from there, we're going to be linking out to two other CDNs for the Dropzone. So the Dropzone is this area here where we actually drag and drop that file. So rather than coding out all of that from scratch, I just reach for that Dropzone library to be able to accomplish that. So from there, we're going to just reference our style CSS like I just went through. And then we're going to just start going into our application. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just build out some utility classes. So we have our H1. If you're not familiar with Tailwind, these are the type of classes that you're going to be able to add within your HTML to get a lot of that styling for free. And then from there, we have this section that we see in the GUI here. So the first thing that we're going to go through is we're going to first actually not forget to install our script for our local app.js, which we'll go through next. So the first thing that we're going to do is go into step one with our upload. So within our upload, you see we have a simple form here, and then we're going to be adding the Dropzone ID within a div here, and you can specify the message and change this if you want, but this is sort of the core Dropzone, sort of the basic get you going sort of example here. And then from there, we're going to head down to our pay section of the HTML. So within the pay section, this is just an example that you can grab from Stripe with the added classes from Tailwind. So you're able to just to link to essentially just the credit card information that you need. So it's pretty straightforward. You just need the card numbers, the expiration, zip code, etc. And then you just have to make sure that you tie that in once you actually set up the JavaScript in the app. So it's pretty flexible. It's not like very opinionated or appending its own styling or containers and stuff like that. So you can be pretty flexible with how you integrate this in your app. So if you're using Stripe, you should be able to have it match like pretty much identically the application that you have set up and its styling. So once we have that set up, so we have the pay and transcribe button here. We also have where we'll be appending the price here. So there's a few pieces going on here, but just to hop down quickly to the transcription or the Transcribify section. So this is going to be where we have the loader pop up. It's also going to be the area where it indicates whether the payment's been successful. And then finally, it's going to actually show the transcription result once the transcription has loaded back. So that's it for our HTML. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of it, virtually all of it isn't really going to do a whole lot until we get to the next part. So the next step and the last step is going to be the front end JavaScript of this. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to initialize the drop zone. So I'll just go through, break this up a little bit here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a new instance of that drop zone area. So we're going to reference it based on that ID that you see here. And then from there, we're going to specify the endpoint that we're going to upload to. So within the server, we have our upload endpoint that we're going to actually be uploading the file to. So once we have that, I'm just going to specify, okay, it's going to be one file. And then here, so the accepted files, these aren't just random audio files that I put in here. So these are the audio files that are accepted from the Whisper API. So if you want to change it and say maybe just include certain types or what have you for whatever reason, go ahead and change them. But just as a starting off point, here's all of them that you can use there. And similarly for the file size, the Whisper API accommodates files up to 25 megabytes. So that's why we have that 25 megabyte cap set within Dropzone there. So once we've done that, we have this init function that we can reference within the Dropzone library. And we're going to utilize this callback where when a file is added, we're going to log out the file has been added. So I have a handful of console logs on the front end for individuals that are following along here. If you run into errors at any point, I just recommend popping open your console and just seeing whether there's any console logs that's showing any errors, or for that matter, showing progress if things are going as they should. So from there, we have a very simple, I just threw this together real quick. The price is going to be based on the file size. So basically just running through this here, I'll just go through a couple here. So if the file size is under 5 megabytes here, we're going to set the price of the HTML to 50 cents. And then the Stripe API is going to handle the input in cents. So we're just going to specify 50 cents, 100 cents or $1 here, or $1.50. So if it's under 5 megabytes, it'll be 50 cents. If it's between 5 and 10 megabytes, it'll be $1, etc. Then, and you could get a lot more creative with this. You can make it much more dynamic. Like if you want to say, really have a calculation that's based wholly on the file size and get really creative. Like if you want to charge, 68 cents for a file, you'll be able to implement your own function here to accomplish the same sort of result if you like. So from there, we're going to handle the success event, and we're just going to simply log it out. We're going to say, okay, if it's successful uploading, log out that response. So once we have that set up, and I'm just going to pause here. So there was a thought when I was building this out on whether to actually allow a user to upload the file before that payment has been accepted, essentially. And I saw a podcast once with one of the founders of Instagram, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was along the lines of one of the tricks that they had early on was they started to upload files and process files before the user even clicked post and submit. That way the app felt a bit faster. So that was a bit of the design decision in why I architected it like this. So it will allow users to upload their files even if they're not paying. So, but you could change that if you want to only start uploading once a payment's successful. But I just wanted to call that out here. So once we have that set up, we're going to set up a simple function for transcribing the audio. So within the transcribe function, we're going to have a fetch request where we're going to await the response. And then this is sort of all the logic that we're ultimately going to be adding on to the front end. So while we wait for the transcription from our transcribe endpoint, or once we've awaited it, essentially, we're going to get the data, we're going to return it in our data variable. If there's an error, we're just going to log out an error. But otherwise, if it's successful, we're going to hide the loader, and then we're going to append the message to the DOM like we saw. And then finally, we're just going to download the transcription. So this download transcription we'll get into in just a moment here. It's just a quick little function that we'll build out. And then finally, we'll have a catch saying if there's any error on the outer scope here, actually interacting with the fetching of the transcription. So once we have that, so this is our simple hacky solution to actually download the file. There's a handful of ways that we could have done this, but just to make a quick example and sort of get the gears turning on how you could potentially use this. So it's just sort of emulating that it's clicking an A tag and then emulating as if it's actually downloading that file. And that's how we have that transcription that pops up there. So a handful of ways to do this. But just a quick down and dirty solution on how you could incorporate that if you wanted. Then next, we're just going to cache a couple of our elements here. And then from there, we're going to create our on payment success. So if the payment was successful, we're going to remove the hidden class, and we're going to remove that from our loader, so it shows that the transcription's actually in progress. And then once we have that done, we're actually going to call our transcribe audio function. So the function that we just spoke about a bit earlier there. So finally, we're just going to have a handful of things to do with Stripe. So this is where we're going to put our public key for Stripe. This is going to be how we reference our card element and how we're actually going to mount all those fields that we had in our HTML. And then from there, we're just going to get the payment form information, and we're going to, on submission, we're going to create a Stripe token. If there's an error, we're just going to log it out. Otherwise, if it's successful, we're going to call our on payment success function. And just to revisit this, I know we're sort of hopping up and down here, but so our on payment success will actually call our transcription audio. So if I go to our transcription audio, and then that's sort of the last step here, assuming it's successful. So once you have that done, you can just open up your terminal. You can click node server.js, fire it up, and you should have your application working. So you can test it out with an audio file that you have. I'll include the audio file that I had used in this example in the repository. Otherwise, you should be off to the races. So if you found this useful, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Otherwise, until the next one.